Can you hear me? Good. So, hello everyone, and we're going to sort of start our session now. Thank you so much for coming today, and nice to see all of you here. My name is Sibel Queiroz. I am the head of knowledge for the Global Resilience Partnership and also a researcher at the Stockholm Resilience Center. And I will have the pleasure to moderate the session together with Molly Helmut, who is a senior technical director for climate at Windrock, right? Did I say it right? Windrock, sorry. And just before I start, I just wanted to say also that the session will be sort of, there will be graphic harvesting of the session online by Priska Lang. And we will sort of share the results of that after the session, sort of. And you will have the chance to accede to it at our platform. So just to give like some sort of context before, we will also have 2 panelists online. I'm not sure if it's possible to see them maybe in the screen. So we will have a set of 5 panelists. And just to share some context, like we see that sort of like several places across the world are being affected by this triple burden of food insecurity, conflict, and climate change. And we see also increased evidence that there are vicious cycles between these drivers and that they are interconnected. And sort of to address this very complex interconnected changes, we need more than incremental change. So we need sort of more transformative change to actually address the root causes of these triple challenges, we should say. And what we are seeing is that several of these more transformative efforts are actually coming from the local level. So sort of that these capacities already exist from the local scale and in local communities, but that they need sometimes to be enabled or unlocked, or sort of some obstacles on the way need to be removed. So this is a bit what we want to discuss in this session. And specifically, we wanted to focus also on the role of sort of like cross-scale interaction. So sort of when local meets larger scale and vice versa, and how can they be disruptive or constructive, and whenever they enable or not sort of local transformative change. So this will be the main focus of our discussion. And we're very happy to have such a diverse set of panelists coming both from donor organizations, civil society, grassroots organizations, private sector. So we want to really hear perspectives. What you all have in common is that all of you are working with local communities in a certain way. And I will be sort of like introducing you as we start the discussion. So I will jump right in. And we actually will move directly to our panelists online. So I will move to Patrick Quentin, who is a chief of party at Windrock, doing a lot of work in the Sahel. And Patrick, I think you can say some words about yourself before you answer my question, but I will start with the question. And the first question is that sort of we see several examples of how these sources of transformative change towards more food security and resilience in the face of conflict and climate change are coming from local initiatives. And we wanted just to start asking you, Patrick, sort of if you see evidence, this type of evidence of positive examples in your work, and if you could tell us a little bit more about it. So back to you.
Thank you, Sibel. So yes, my name is Patrick Quentin. I'm the chief of party of the USAID-funded Terv Project, which is implemented in Burkina Faso and Niger by Windrock International. So just to give you a bit of context, the Terv's principal objective is to reinforce local institutions and systems on natural resource management. So mostly on access to land and water resources, which are the cornerstone of food security, but at the same time, the root causes of conflict in the Sahel. Burkina Faso and Niger are 2 of the world's most climate vulnerable country. In fact, the temperature over the Sahel is projected to increase between 2 and 4.3 degrees by 2080, which is quite scary considering how hot it is already today. This is having the climate change is having an impact on the crop yields. And it's not yet, but it's planned that there will be also a further impact on the drought-tolerant crops, such as millet and sorghum, which are the staple crops, the staple food of the communities there. At the same time, we're having precipitation trends which are uncertain, but what is pretty clear among all the provisions is that future dry and wet periods are likely to become more extreme. And this, we see that already. We've seen like recently some rainfalls of 12 centimeters over one night in one of the communes that we have recorded. And this is having an impact, an immediate impact on conflict. Let me give you just a quick example. A recent dry spell in northern Niger has forced the pastoralists to move the southern way. And their animals have started to trample the crops which had not yet been harvested. And this has led to conflict and numerous deaths of people. So that's the reality now. So climate change really acts as a catalyst of land degradation, food insecurity, and conflict. And it's not 2030, it's not 2050, it's really already started now. So Terv is focusing its efforts on risk management using local contingency planning as an approach. So the project is actually facilitating participative and inclusive processes to develop communal contingency plans, so local contingency plans. And this is based on inputs of various community groups, such as herders, farmers, you have women, you have youth, you also have like traditional chiefdom. What we're doing is also, we're trying to work at the crossroad between community and local government. So we're involving both the formal and informal institutions. Doing that, in fact, it allows us to obtain the community's insights. They know the place. They've seen numerous development efforts over decades. They've seen what functions, what works less. So they are bringing these insights, and the linkage to the national government allows them to have access to early warning information from the central government. And also, in some instances, when the shocks are becoming a reality, they are getting some funding to respond. The interesting part of working with those communities has been that we've really seen that they are planning interventions that are not only adapting to climate change, such as community-driven drainage cleaning to prevent the impact of floods, but also interventions that mitigate climate change. For instance, the restoration of degraded grasslands that is fixing carbon into the soil, contributes to underground water recharge, and improve the productivity of land. So really, the communities are very capable of transforming a problem into a solution. And we as a project, we built on those locally made contingency plans to activate a crisis modifier that is inbuilt into the project, and to allow them to put these plans, to activate it, to implement them, and put that into a reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And I think it was really important also your point that all these impacts are really being experienced now, and it's not later. And I think I will just continue to our second speaker online, Tiwanit Gebre Johannes, who is a program manager at the Near East Foundation, working with resilience programming. And Tiwani, would you like just to share also from your experience, if you see these positive examples of transformative change from local communities, just briefly? Thank you.
Thanks, Sibyl. I think all the dynamics that Patrick has mentioned in relation to the effects of climate change and effects of climate change as a driver of conflict applies to the context in which Near East Foundation works. I'll speak specifically on Mali and Sudan, where the same challenges are faced, and highlight two approaches that the Near East Foundations has taken in working with conflict-affected communities in Darfur and in Mopti. So one approach that the Nearest Foundation employs is the peace building through natural resource management, understanding that resource-based livelihoods are heavily undermined by competition over land and water resources, as these resources are strained due to climate change. So increased temperatures, unpredictable rainfalls that lead to floods and droughts, and that undermine existing livelihoods in these communities. And they put increasing pressure on water points, on grazing areas, and rain-fed crops, undermining food security as well. So the Nearest Foundation's peace building through natural resource management approach essentially takes a participatory approach, assessing the context of conflict, food security at the local level, and creating and establishing governance agreements amongst conflicting parties, using things such as land convention, natural resource management plans, and building these communities' capacities for dispute resolution and facilitating dialogue. And at the same time, drawing down investments into shared resources so that there's joint actions being developed and financed to restore and improve shared resources. And as a result of that, reduce conflicts over shared resources in these climate affected contexts. Another example is in Mali, where we have decentralized climate funds, where the same context applies, the same challenges apply. And in this context, we use local adaptation planning, where local climate adaptation plans, action plans are created by the local communities, and working with local governments, these communities are able to have an approval process where they come up with innovations to address their issues, and these are funded locally in collaboration with local government bodies. And some of the investments focus on climate smart agriculture demonstration plots, water and soil conservation, and have actually been shown over time to reduce resource-based conflicts as well. And I'll just end by saying that in both these contexts, I think we all know now that there are ongoing conflicts in these areas that have undermined the gains made in these local efforts as well. So this is not to say that there are not challenges to conflict that undermine the work of peace building and the work of decentralizing and investing in locally led adaptation, but that innovations and investments do improve the situation and address some of the root causes driving conflicts within these communities.
Thank you so much, Tsiwanet. And I think we will move to the sort of next question, like going a little bit deeper into sort of these cross-scale connections and their role. I will move to Keith. So Keith, you are the CEO and the co-founder of Producers Trust. And you are working a lot with sort of value chains across scale and sort of connecting farmers with larger scales. And I will start with the question on sort of, if you can tell us a little bit more on how you see the role of these cross-scale interactions on enabling sort of local capacities, and sort of also like what kind of cross-scale interactions are important, and if you can tell us a little bit more of, you know, how can they be established on a good basis?
Great, thanks. Hey everyone, my name is Keith. I am CEO of Producers Trust. We have a global platform working with networks of farmers. We help to digitize them and bring to market their data and products. But core to our business is connecting in data, markets, and finance together so that we can unlock more direct supply chains. So I'll share a model for how we look to multi-stakeholders to drive transformation at the source, and keep in your thoughts that I am private sector and entrepreneurial, and so we look for getting things done. And so I'll take a model where you have networks of small farmers that are often struggling in terms of not having good practices in terms of productivity and sustainability. And if you talk to them, their big challenge is making more money. That's usually the challenge we find. So how do they make more money? You need direct market access. So if you need maybe brands, retailers, distributors, they can get to directly. Now, if you follow this, in order to get to these brands and retailers and such, what you need is infrastructure. So you need a place, a physical space to actually aggregate outputs, to be able to reach these farmers with the right genetics, the right inputs, maybe it's solar pumps, irrigation, other systems. Now, in order to get this infrastructure, you then need finance. And you need a combination in these markets of private and public finance. So the public finance looks to the private to de-risk their participation. So what does private finance want to see in order to put in their capital to these infrastructures? They want to see market commitment. And so even though local food security might be the overall goal, local food security does not de-risk investment. What de-risks investment is participation from secured buyers. Nestle, Unilever, Mars, Walmart, maybe national retailers, maybe World Food Program. And so what's going to unlock the participation of what we call off-takers or buyers? What's going to unlock their participation is de-risking their supply chains. So what are these leading brands and retailers now looking for? They're looking for data validation. They need to know that the source is not from deforested land. There's new laws coming in Europe. They need to know there's no child labor, which is a huge reputational brand risk. And they need to know what are the carbon impacts, and soon there'll be biodiversity, water, and other targets. And they need to know this with high-level accuracy. So you see this formula where you have markets that want this direct source, but they need this data. You know, finance wants to invest, but they need to de-risk their investment by having markets. And I believe the key unlock to these scenarios is actually the extension services who reach the farmers, in my opinion. Because in order to get the farmers to the capacity, in order to reach the markets, they need to be worked with and train each other. And the best models that I've seen is actually farmers who train other farmers. So champion farmers who are already doing the right practices, getting the tools they need to then train other farmers so that they can learn the practices and get to the productivity, the qualities, the sustainability. And then, this is the key unlock we're seeing. These same farm extension groups, and these can be called agripreneurs, capacity building technicians, they could be government, they could be NGO, they could be private sector, but they become data capturers. The ability for those who reach the farmers to not only build capacity, but to help capture and organize data. And so once you have this type of ecosystem, where now you have extension services that could be funded through UNDP, governments, NGOs, there's lots of funding sources for that. You have networks of farmers and aggregators, you have infrastructure, you have market, you have finance. And these are the scenarios that we are seeing come together in a truly impactful blended finance, PPP. These have been buzzwords for a while, but when you look for case studies, you don't see many in the ag sector. And we're seeing that this linkage of market offtake participation, unlocking these supply chains, being incredibly impactful to the small farmers at the source.
Thank you so much, Kate. It was really interesting to hear. And I would like to continue with the same question, but to Nemo. So, Nemo Hassan, you are the director of the NGO Somalia Consortium. So you work with several civil society organizations. And I would like to pose the same question to you. Like, if you could tell us a little bit more on the role that these cross-scale connections have to play. And I think that the value of this discussion is also that we have so many different perspectives here. And we also don't have to agree. I just want to say that. So, including the audience. You will have time for questions as well. And there's also, I just wanted to say, because I forgot to say that I think that there is also the possibility for listeners online to pose questions if you would like. So Nemo, I will give you the microphone.
Great, thank you. Is it still morning? Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Nima Hassan. I am based in Somalia. Our network is made up of international NGOs, big national NGOs, small national NGOs, CBOs, women-led organizations. So we're quite diverse in the members that we have. And then the platform is focused on common advocacy, providing common voice, addressing issues collectively. And actually, maybe I'll bring in the coordination aspect of it and how that's strengthening the interconnectedness and intersectionality of food security, conflict, and climate. So in our platform, we have thematic working groups, and we have a resilience, climate, and adaptation working group where we facilitate and enable cross-learning and sharing information among the partners and the members of the consortia. And this is a platform for them to share experiences, innovations, and on what works well to address. I don't want to go back to the context-related question because the similarities of what my colleagues online have described is exactly what is happening in Somalia and in the Horn of Africa as well. So we are between hard droughts and floods, and then a long, protracted IDP crisis, and certain areas are actually inaccessible to everybody, but maybe so to the INGOs and international community. And this is where now the value addition for local partners and working with local partners comes in as well. So the accessibility to the community. In this platform, we share, so we invite either the members or the private sector or even the government to share those best practices and on how to address these climate-related shocks. One example that I could share is a local partner that piloted hydroponic fodder production, which is exactly what our pastorals and agricultural communities need, to share that, and is giving those experiences and skills to the community so that they could use this to feed their livestock. Another example that I could share is the index-based livestock insurance, where the entrepreneurs come in to educate and allow pastoralists to use the services. But what's also very important is the ability to integrate these different types of interventions to ensure that you are supporting the affected communities. And I always say this in my, I'm not a climate expert or resilience expert, but I do see the shocks and the impact it has on the community. So we do need to find ways to work better to ensure and put the community and the most vulnerable in the center. And if we do that, we're able to address their needs from whatever instruments that is available to us, whether it's resilience, humanitarian response, which is the largest funding that Somalia receives, and integrating that. So whether it's the health sector, the food security, conflict sensitivity is really important, so that we, especially when you have mobility, communities moving around, that you don't create harm within the host and the IDPs as well. So it's really important to share that. So within our platform, this is the sort of the space to provide that cross-learning and sharing information among all stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Nemo. And I think we'll continue with a third question. We'll introduce our last panelist. So Rosalili, let's see if I can pronounce your last name. Rosalili Ushkewakunze.
Yes,
almost. Okay.
Almost there.
So you work for the Food Justice Network in Zimbabwe, and a lot with climate justice, right? And I think it would be really interesting to hear your perspective about if you have seen, I mean, when we are when we are sort of like trying to make these cross-scale connections, you know, having larger scale actors, it doesn't need to be, you know, huge actors, but whenever we go up in scale or whenever the local scale meets other scales, what we see is that sometimes things work and sometimes things don't work, right? And so we also wanted to touch a little bit upon where there are sort of examples, or if you see cases, you know, of when do these cross-scale interactions don't work, or when do they even undermine existing sort of local capacities? And if you just could talk a little bit from your experience about that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rosalie Lucia Kunze, as stated before, and I'm from Food Justice Network. We are a social movement of young people and women who are doing their bit in trying to transform food systems in Zimbabwe. And we mainly work in climate justice issues and extractivism, and also transforming food systems using agroecology and seed sovereignty. So in our line of work, we realize we interact with a lot of actors, and some of the methods that have been working are the way our development partners or external actors have shifted the way they aid or they help communities. So there is that transfer now from just giving the short, unsustainable solutions to actually transforming communities in a holistic way. And this is being done by scaling up or building capacities of communities to become more resilient. So back then, when we would talk about development, we knew that it was just food parcels, you know, actors coming in to help short term. But then there has been that transformation, and I think that is one of the ways that has worked for us. But then we also have challenges, and mostly these come from the power imbalances that exist. So at times when we have external actors coming in, they're essentially trying to push a narrative that may not help or aid the local people. So currently we're battling with issues to do with the carbon credit markets, and it's really something that is not helping us. And also the issues to do with people-centered interventions. At times it's not an issue to bring in new interventions, but to scale up existing interventions that people are already practicing. So I always give this example to say that, you know, we have actors that come in to say, we need to teach you about agroecology. And we're saying, what is agroecology? Agroecology is something that we've been practicing for years. So there is no need to reintroduce such interventions. There is just need to scale up. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rosalie. I think this was an excellent point. Exactly, also where we started, that, you know, these capacities already exist. And I think that kind of leads well to the next, or maybe like just before that, Kate, could we just hear like another thought from you? I know that, of course, that like in your business, you are sort of more focused on successes, but could you give us also like an example of when do these like cross-scale interactions don't work, or when you find problems, and what type of problems do you find? Because maybe you have a different perspective here.
Definitely. So when we started our business, we were just digitizing farmers to give them profiles to do market linkage. But what we realized in the global south, to overcome challenges, you end up having to work through ministries of agriculture, UN agencies, and a whole network of NGOs. And so we've learned the hard way of how to navigate, and we still are learning, navigate those waters. And one of our mottos is give credit but not control. Meaning, give all the credit for all the success to everyone who needs it, but don't hand over the rhythm of how to move things forward to the folks in the public sector, as they're not necessarily used to being a startup entrepreneur environment where it's like go, go, go. So we try to keep that pace. Not that we want to control the outcomes or control the narrative, but more the flow of how things move. And I want to shift to an example of what has been working for us. And we have a program that was announced this week developing agroforestry cocoa in Brazil, so cacao crop to scale. And what we've done thus far is keep it in private sector with shared value, shared mission, understanding that we have offtake that needs commodity cocoa, which is low price. We have a producer that does agroforestry where there's multiple harvests, multiple crops coming out. So there'll be ginger and turmeric exported to Europe. There'll be cassava, plantains, other fruits. That'll be for local food security. There'll be hardwoods, carbon credits. And what we have been finding is if you bring in multiple private sector actors to de-risk offtake and to engage, then you can actually raise the value of that investment and returns back to the program. And then once you've really defined a model, you start to see in the ecosystem, well, who can start to help by leveraging the aggregation and the training we're going to be doing on site to reach small farmers, communities, indigenous in the area. You know, how can we start to engage the Ministry of Environment to get concessional lands to lower the cost to acquire, you know, the capital and acquire the land. So, you know, what doesn't work is a lot, and we've learned the hard way in many scenarios, but what we find working is, you know, let the mission be driven by a shared values that's about farmer well-being, community well-being, environmental well-being, but let private sector kind of rhythm and our need to survive as a company drive the pace, and then bring in the public actors, NGO actors, to bring in that context and that value that they can do, which we can't. And so we really want to make sure we're sewing a quilt that makes sense to the private sector so that it can move faster and we can generate the impacts.
Thanks, Kate. I think I just want to say that we want to give time to the audience for questions. And so I will ask, I have yes, at least one more question, but I would ask panelists to be brief so that we can sort of have time for everything. But I would really like to ask this couple of questions still. So sort of the first question is that, you know, we're talking about transformative change, right? And to enable change that is really transformative. We often say that there's always structures and dynamics that we need to somehow disrupt, right? And other things that need to be nurtured or built up. And so I would turn to Patrick online and ask him, if you could tell us a bit from your perspective, some problems that might sort of obstruct your activities, or sort of some structures or dynamics that you see that would need to be taken down to enable sort of existing capacities, existing local capacities. Patrick, just briefly, if you could say some words about that. Thank you.
Sure. Maybe one thing I would like to mention is, you know, we need exponential interventions if we want to really tackle the issue at hand. And for that, I'll join Keith in the thinking that, you know, what is the driver? The main driver of our communities is how to make money to feed their family and to educate them, et cetera, et cetera. So this is really something that is in the back of the mind of our intervention. And when we are doing landscape restoration, we're doing it through a business lens. So looking at how you can actually have a business approach to sustainable landscape restoration that is really helping. So when you do that, you realize that nature is actually very forgiving. And we've had some great results and some community groups who managed to sell fodder at a pretty good price. But as soon as, you know, they make money, it attracts attention of some people who also want to have their share within the network. So in addition to that, the context where we are working are really risky. So what we realized is that you would need some seed funding to really bring that to scale. And locally led interventions often struggle to gain access to funding and to scale, in fact, those local intervention and to attract also the investors. Rare are the people who want to invest in northern Burkina Faso at this stage, and I do understand them. And what I see as one need is maybe to have some special purpose vehicles who can collate the micro projects because they're also too small to attract investors, and to find innovative and accountable ways to fund them. And this is really particularly valid in some countries that are having very very weak institutions. Maybe on another hand, I would like to mention that the Sahel looks like a desert. What is surprising from an outsider's perspective is that there's a lot of water reserves underground, and that's really having a huge potential to improve the food security through a network of small-scale irrigation agriculture. But this is something that needs to be done responsibly, because we don't know we don't know enough, in fact, in terms of how the recharge is functioning, how those aquifers communicate between each other. And that brings me to my last point, is of the need of looking at transnational intervention. When we're looking at natural resource management, the intervention that makes sense is really to look at the landscape or the watershed level. And if we don't look at that, we're tackling only half of the problem. And that's something that we've been struggling. So in short, is access to funding for those small groups, transnational projects, and also trying to really focus on the business side of the interventions that we're trying to put. Maybe finally, if I may, transnational approaches are particularly important in pastoralist context, because the movement of herders is an essential aspect of their resilience. So that would be going a long way in trying to tackle some of the conflicts between the farmers and herders, but also in reducing the increasing frustration within some of the groups that might tempt them to join some extremist violent groups. So it's really interlinked. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And Rosalili, I would turn to you with the same question. Like, what are the things that we need to disrupt, the structures and power dynamics that we need to disrupt if we want to have enabled that transformative change?
Okay, so I would say that, speaking from an African point of view, food is more than an issue of satiation. It's more than survival. It's economic, it's social, it's cultural, it's political, and it's even religious to some extent. So these are the dynamics that exist within the food system, and we should be wary of the contestation that happens there. So whether we're talking about pastoral conflict in East Africa, xenophobia in South Africa, it is essentially the struggle for resources. So we need to be wary of the politicization of food systems. And also, there is always that contestation between business or private sector players and the communities. We can talk of issues to do with the way multinational companies have privatized the seed system, excluding the communal farmers from the seed systems. So those are issues that exist, and there is need to dismantle that inequality to enable people to be sovereign.
Thank you so much, Rosalili. And our very last question before we go to the audience, I will start online with Suanit, and we talk a little bit about things that we need to disrupt. What are the capacities that we need to build if we want to sort of enable local action? If you could just speak very briefly, some thoughts about it, Suanit.
Sure. I think the capacities that we need to build are related to the challenges that are faced. So I think Patrick mentioned some of them as well. In terms of being able to decentralize funds and enable access to climate financing at the local levels, it's the capacity to manage those funds and to be able to have the systems in place at the local level so that there is accountable forms of financing being flown down and implementation happening at the most local levels. Those investments can be effectively scaled at the local communities. And in terms of conflicts management systems have been undermined by broader socio-political changes. So traditional forms of mediation have broken down, new actors are coming into the fore. So building capacities for conflict mitigation, conflict management, as well as natural resource management, peaceful natural resource management at the local communities, and strengthening these community structures that are moving towards more peaceful resolution of conflicts is also critical. Another one is related to market linkages as well. So ensuring that wherever these interventions are happening, that there is a market logic so that there is increased incomes to these local populations, so that they are able to benefit from the resources that they do have in some contexts in abundance, even though there are challenges to commercialization and increasing incomes at those levels as well.
Thank you so much, Janet. These were great thoughts. And we will end with you, Nemo, with the same question, what are the capacities that we need to build so that to ensure that these cross-scale interactions are actually constructive and not disruptive?
Thank you. I absolutely agree to everything has been said already in terms of what needs to be built. I think we need to be thinking of capacity sharing rather than capacity building. So certainly, I mean, the power in words is really important. So we do need to change our mindsets and how we describe the global south and how we describe ourselves. You know, so that's that whole thinking has to change. The power dynamics my sister here mentioned is really important. You know, resources. I guess money makes the world go round, right? So whoever has the resources has the power. We also need to look at the way we partner. The equity in partnerships. If we see ourselves as equal partners, equal footing, bringing certain values and experience and know-how to the table, then I think we will work better together. And as I said, I will end it with this so we have a chance to have a conversation. If we have the community at the center, whether we're a business or public, then I think that would make our interventions and our support a lasting and impactful one.
Thank you so much. These were excellent final thoughts, and I think that what you were talking about is exactly that type of like mindset changes, right? That actually are very deep, and that they are the ones that really sort of lead to transformative change. So I will pass to Molly now, who is like going to moderate the questions from the audience. So please just go ahead and ask our panelists.
All right, thank you so much. I just wanted to say a few words before I opened up. We heard a lot about building adaptive capacity in different ways through increasing income, better governance, planning, access to finance and markets, and improving value chains, better data, and locally led solutions. We heard about some barriers. You know, specifically, what doesn't work is a lot. I think I like that phrase from Keith. But, you know, in part, ownership questions, ownership of resources, who profits. I think that you can see the diversity of the panelists here, and you know, would like to just open it up and get the audience questions and see if we can dive in a little bit more deeply on the nexus between conflict, food security, and climate.
Hi, I'm Angela Timbrook, and I'm a farmer. And so I have questions. I work on 4 continents, and I own my own farm, but all the farms I work with, the women own. So I want to understand from you, Keith, how is your money made? Does a farmer pay? Do you receive funding? Because if there is nothing for me to pay, I will join your network today. But if there is something for me to pay, I need to understand what is my ROI, because we are as business as well as farmers. So we not only deal with the land and the climate and have diversification on our farms, we believe in decentralization of farming. And so I want to understand how do you make money since you're in the private sector. I'm going to just go ahead and ask all my questions so that I can just not pass it along. Yeah, I just have one more. How are the rural farmers using your data? Because the rural farmers I work with, we don't even have internet or electricity. So I'm curious as to how they can use this. And then how is the community factor in this? How do you make sure that the community, because women in many places are unheard, and so I want to understand how you make sure that the women are heard because they're the ones who are primarily growing the food. So those are the questions I have. Thank you.
You know, I'm going to take a few more questions, let Keith think for a minute. Anybody else have any questions that they want to pose?
I'm used to pitching to investors, so I appreciate the tough questions. I think, how do we make money? Great question. So we'd love to invite you to join. It's free to register, participate for farmers. And that's how we've grown our network to 5,000 organizations, about 4 million farmers represented, is by not charging the farmers. There's enough people making money off the farmers, input suppliers, people selling them equipment, aggregation services and so on. So our job is to be in service of farmers and the groups that organize farmers. So there's no fees. Who we take the money from, and there's two verticals. The first is the folks that have big profit margins and make a lot of money, which are the brands and retailers. So what we're doing is helping create strategies, solutions for how to connect to the source and more direct supply chains, and then giving them an opportunity to actually license the data that comes from the source so that they can de-risk their compliance, de-risk their marketing and other areas. And that data license is shared back transparently at the source. So it's a profit share model on the data license. The second vertical is actually helping to aggregate and trade. So in many scenarios, farmers and aggregated networks of small farmers can't make it downstream where the money is paid higher. So there's our commodity trading friends whose DNA is not about helping farmers in most cases. Some cases there are, I don't want to generalize, but for any of you who've encountered the commodity traders on the ground, exploitation is a more common word than empowerment. So what we're trying to do is create a transparent direct trading model where we take a fee that's transparent to all parties to facilitate trade where we can buy and then sell downstream. So those are our two verticals. So advisory and data, and then commercialization. How do we organize data where there's no cell phone signals? That's where the farmer extension networks come in. There's folks who are reaching the farmers and can input the data in their iPad, their phone, on a notebook, and then when they get back to their office, they are inputting the data then. In many cases, the cooperatives we work with and the associations, they've already done that work to organize a lot of the information and data. What we're doing is enhancing the data so that we're meeting the business requirements, whether it's for buyers or even carbon credits, other things. So we look at what is the baseline data that's already there, and then organize more data only when there's a need for it. What's a pressure that's happening on the ground now is making farmers organize more data, more certifications, more information, but not giving them more money to do it. So our feeling is if we're going to make farmers do something or extension services, they need to be paid. And that's the way we organize. And women, so in many of our communities, it's women who are driving the change. Our largest farmer program in India with RYSS in Andhra Pradesh is based around women's self-help group models. And it's the empowerment of women in the communities who are already saving money. They're growing food, oftentimes because they're thinking about their kids and their family and having nutritious food, and teaching them, not us, but our partners, working with them to enhance their practices. And then the men see how the women are making more money and they get jealous and then start to learn. And that's been, the success stories that we're seeing in our partners.
So I don't know if we have a contract here, but it sounds like Angela potentially could sign up. So I would be very curious. So most of the time, interesting thing is that in the U.S., people think that we are wealthy. That farmers are women farmers, because we're in the U.S., we're wealthy. We actually experience the same situations that women in every other country. So in the U.S., we have a sustainable, controlled environment, low-tech agriculture operation that we've been in business with for 10 years. Yet we've stood with the most invested men in the United States who have recently collapsed at $500 million of investment. We are still standing, and we still haven't received investment, not from the U.S. government and not from private investors. So what you are experiencing is not countrywide, it is women-wide. All right, thank you. Do we have any other questions? Great. Please introduce yourself.
Right, so hello everyone. So this is Mohammed. I'm from Yemen, and I work for the Dutch Catholic Organization for Development Aid in Yemen. So, I mean, as everybody knows, Yemen has been in a protracted crisis for more than 8 years now. And what we're trying to do more is now to get more into development work. But then, so for example, a lot of development actors we're doing is more investing into greenhouses, raising the productivity, and then that doesn't contribute to the resilience, it doesn't contribute to the development of the communities. So what we try to do is link farmers to market systems, off-takers, just like Keith was saying. But then we lack governance, we lack data, we lack everything you mentioned, which actually hindered the process and made a lot of difficulties to invest in the farming sector and the agricultural sector. So from your experiences, I mean, if you've ever worked in such or in a similar context, I mean, what can be done to actually overcome these challenges and be able to contribute more to this agricultural sector and actually move from, because this is more of a humanitarian approach and it's very difficult to move to development. So what can be done to actually move into development approach more? Thank you.
It's actually similar to the kind of questions that I was thinking about myself in these kind of contexts where you have a humanitarian crisis and very real immediate needs. And we're talking about transformative right now. And so sometimes the balance of those can be challenging. So I'm interested in the answer to that question. So panelists, think on that. I'm going to go to the next question.
Hi, my name is Nienke Schaap. I'm a colleague of Mohamed's, working for Coordate. I didn't realize my colleague sneaked in. And I'm very happy he already asked part of my question. So we're clearly colleagues. That's great. I wanted to ask, yes, I'm building upon the two questions there. Another buzzword is the Nexus. And what we see a lot is humanitarian actors thinking, we have been providing food, let's now provide seeds, and they think they're doing Nexus. So I would really like to know, what do you think the Nexus should look like? I know it's a difficult question. It's like the unicorn. Everyone knows how it looks like and never seen one. But still happy to hear your take on it. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I have a question, follow-up about something that you mentioned, and I'm sorry I didn't catch your name earlier, but it's about the CCS technology in the developing world and how you see that disrupting the food and ag systems on the ground or potentially benefiting it. So kind of touching upon some of the issues, the local issues you were seeing with carbon capture and sequestration, kind of source or on the ground in the developing world, but maybe initiated by the developed world to kind of launch these carbon markets.
And then one more question and pass it over to the panelists.
Thank you. My name's Deirdre, and I'm also part of the Caritas Network from Trocra, based in Ireland. Thank you to the panelists. It's great to see such a diverse panel. I suppose I can't see you, so maybe this will be easier to say. I don't mean to challenge, well, I do mean to challenge. I think that I can see a tension between the agroecology approach that's presented by the partner organisation in Zimbabwe, and then what's being presented here from the private sector, which we don't often get to interface. So I do want to ask from that private sector perspective, because you mentioned values and mission-based, is what joins us and drives us. And I would question that as coming from the private sector. I'm not sure that's the case, but that's what you said. And how do you manage that risk in terms of harm? Because that's what I think underlies a lot of this. Agroecology promotes an approach that addresses that harms that chemical fertilizers and all of those inputs can do to destroy the land and that sustainability. And I would imagine that you're bringing together those traders and private sectors, big companies that have that investment in those negative harms that ultimately undermine the agroecological approach. And so how do you address that? I'd love it. Because in theory, I think it sounds great, but they would be my concerns and red flags.
I think I might be correct in that we have 5 minutes left. And so what I'd like to do is just have a rapid round of response. If you can touch on the questions, each of you take a minute.
Okay. I'll speak to the Nexus question. The local partners and people on the ground are already doing Nexus. I think the labeling is where we get bogged down on, but it just means providing the support and the investments the communities need to be able to, lift them out of poverty or move them into development. So if you have the humanitarian, the biggest problem that we have in Somalia is majority of the funding is of humanitarian nature, which means short-term, life-saving, and you're in this cyclical rotation. But if you take in the community approach, inputs life-saving, then build those resilience and recovery, then invest in development. That could take at the same time, but what the biggest problem is having this silo approach where it's mandate-based and that interconnectivity isn't there on the ground, but work with the local partners, better empower them, bring them on board as an equal partner with more equitable, and that we will resolve our problems, I think.
Rosalie?
Okay, so to respond to, I'm not sure whether your question is directly to the issue on the carbon credits and how they affect the community or the power imbalance, but I will tell you that, so for us to have a truly transformative food system, in order for us to transform food systems, there should be some form of justice. And we all know that there is no justice in business, right? So if we bring in solutions such as the carbon credit markets, there is no justice for the community, because what you're essentially doing is you are aiding to the problem that is already existing. So for us, that will be a false solution. We need transformative action that enable communities to take ownership of whatever solution that they are coming up with. Yeah.
Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, so farmers are business people, especially the small ones. They don't even know that they are most of the time, and they're not very good ones. But the rest of the supply chain, they know they're business people, and they know their margins and make money off of the small farmers. So I think it's really a matter of integrity, accountability, and transparency. So we need to hold accountable with data validation and really proving what's happening at the source. And to say we're mission aligned or anything else is easy. To actually prove it with data and numbers is what needs to happen next. So I think it's up to all of us to hold the private sector extremely accountable, and we need to find the right actors who are willing to act with integrity and build partnerships where integrity equals more profitability.
Perfect. Tjanoit?
I'm going to try and be ambitious to tackle the Nexus question as well as the question from our colleague in Yemen, which is a very good question, with an example from North Kordofan. So NEF works in North Kordofan and has established 13 cooperatives, working mainly on non-timber forest products, primarily gum arabic. So what we do is we provided them training kind of to come together. So it's an association membered cooperative that works together to aggregate, to kind of access markets. And on the side also there's a community revolving fund in which the association can lend out to its members, and then the members pay back, etc. When the war in Sudan broke out, one of the things we're able to do is continue to capitalize the funds of these 13 cooperatives so that they can immediately lend out money on concessional terms as well to their members. So when crises happen, I think in humanitarian terms, we think of reaching the most vulnerable, but those existing associations, existing community associations and membership-based associations that have farmers, that have businesses together can also be vehicles for providing assistance. And at the same time, when there is a disruption in access to markets, because we maintain an ongoing relationship with these associations, we also can be an actor outside of the conflict that can facilitate some of these transactions and ensure that there's still ongoing investments and ongoing support so that they can make it through these difficult times until the conflict subsides or access to markets is restored and their livelihoods can continue as well. So I think when we think of the Nexus, when we think of providing assistance, it doesn't necessarily have to be done in the original kind of siloed humanitarian model. We can integrate a lot of these approaches from humanitarian, from development, from peace building, in order to address the needs of people in conflict-affected settings as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. We are a little bit out of time, actually, but I don't want to cut off my colleague from Winrock. Patrick, if you could keep it to 30 seconds, and then we have 1 minute wrap up.
Thanks, Molly. Yeah, on the same, I think everyone who has been working on the fragile context has seen some emergency happen, and then it's like a big explosion of funding that is coming and that destroys and undermines the work that is being done by development actors. So what we did using, in fact, the crisis modifier that was inbuilt in our intervention is to try to strengthen, in fact, the structures that we were doing, that we were reinforcing while responding to the crisis. One example is when repairing a water asset, a water pump somewhere, we made sure that there was a contract being signed between an operator and the commune, which was not the case. Or when there is another intervention, we make sure that our crisis modifier is activated along the lines of the community contingency plan. So trying to really work towards anti-fragility when we are responding to a crisis. So that's just our way to do the Nexus, if I may. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for a fantastic panel. I think it was really a really rich discussion. Thank you to the audience also. And I think we heard a lot of different perspectives. I think that's exactly the point. That's exactly where do we need to talk. But I just wanted to finish by asking Halaslassi Medin, who is Director of Programs at the IKEA Foundation. I don't know if I pronounced your name right. I'm so sorry. But I would ask you to do just 1 minute of final reflections on the session, and then we can all let you go. I know that COP is busy.
Thank you so much. It's very difficult to stand on the way of people leaving the next session. Thank you so much for inviting us to listen to this. It was a really good session. Look, talking about food and food systems and agriculture in the most stable, without climate risks, is actually very, very tough. But then to talk about food in the context of alarming climate change, conflicts, of course, is extremely, extremely tough. But I was so humbled to see that there's so many actors working on this with optimism. So I think that's the main takeaway that I take. 1 or 2 points on what I took away personally, and I think that are relevant to keep. 1 point is that transformation, which is sort of a bit of a buzzword that we use, I think it was unpacked in a way that was meaningful here, that it's really driven locally. It's a combination of local actions made by the choices of people who are facing the problem, who are solving their challenges. And our assignment perhaps is to enable that a bit more, to create a space for that a bit more. So that was clear to me. The other point that I took was that while we often talk about nexus and silos and we use terminologies like regenerative agriculture and this and that, farmers don't live in silos. They don't care much about our terminologies. They just make choices, again, under constraints that are so difficult. So we have to keep in mind that. Now, 1 more point, if you allow me to perhaps to share. Also, my takeaway is that as much as we work in context where we want to avoid the tipping points that bring this nexus challenge between food, climate change, and conflicts, we also have to work by assuming that conflicts will always be there and people will always be displaced. And at IKEA Foundation, we are very active in the space of refugee livelihoods. And what we're really learning is that more focus is needed to support the livelihood of displaced people and refugees. There's a lot of room for innovation. There's a lot of room for private sector engagement. And that requires rights of the people who are displaced. That requires innovative finance to deliver resources, renewable energy, and otherwise in these communities. And that requires innovations around that bring displaced people and local communities together to work together. So I think we need to have a two-pronged approach. We work, of course, to avoid this challenge, but also we have to assume that conflicts will be there and millions and millions of people, unfortunately, will continue to be displaced, and we have to keep it in mind. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Well, thank you very much. Then I think that we officially close the session. Feel free to stay around and talk with our brilliant panelists. Thank you so much, Patrick and Tsunami, for also being at the session. It was lovely to have you.